Tony, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be here to talk about our latest innovation in CCU. I will be talking about both the carbon tax concept, which is our solution for recycling CO2 into sustainable plastics, but I also want to use this opportunity to talk about CCU in general. Why is it so important that we actually tap into our emissions and use them as raw material instead of only decarbonizing, capturing it, and storing them?
Is it okay?
Let's see, can I change slides?
Oh.
Oh, it's a bit too fast. Okay, then a few words about the company. So Fortum Recycling and Waste, and NG Group is a leading Nordic provider of circular solutions and different environmental services. Our 3,500 employees are focused on turning waste into value. So that's at the core of what we are doing. The legacy of the company is treating municipal mixed household waste and hazardous waste substances. So we have been incinerating waste for several decades. But the main purpose why actually we are here today, I want to talk about this topic. We've heard many sessions today speaking about decarbonization, speaking about carbon capture and storage. But if we actually stop to think about what are we actually doing? We are capturing and storing the most valuable resource we have. And that is the carbon found in our CO2 emissions. The same carbon, well, carbon is essence for life itself, but the same carbon is actually as a raw material for almost all the products we use in our daily lives. And if you think about CCS, yes, you can decarbonize your activities, but it's a linear solution. It's a solution that doesn't enable a circular economy. It doesn't address the fact that we are running out of materials in this world. This is a completely untapped resource that we should utilize and not only capture and store. Why is it then so essential that we talk about the circular economy, we talk about utilization? If we think about the fact we are every year extracting 100 gigatons of raw materials. From this part, 7.2% gets turned back into the economy after its first use. If you think about the trend, from a factual point of view, the trend has been declining for the past few years. And I think this is alarming, but at the same time, CCU is a solution for reversing this decline. We should come up with new ways of recycling and utilizing our own CO2 emissions. Of course, our approach to the topic is that as a legacy, we are a waste incineration company. We are treating the most difficult waste this society is generating. Whether we're talking about mixed household waste, hazardous substances, that's our starting point. We're the last point in the value chain. But at the same time, there's vast potential. That waste that we are treating today has valuable carbon in it. And if we look at the, let's say, the opportunities or the possibilities, there are around 500 waste energy plants in Europe. They treat 100 million tons of municipal mixed household waste, which converts into 100 million tons of CO2 emissions that could be utilized and repurposed for producing valuable and sustainable materials. This is in essence our vision. Waste to energy is perfectly suited for this because however we have more separate collection or we increase the recycling of waste, we'll always have waste that cannot be recycled with any existing technologies. So we'll always have waste that needs to be incinerated. But we believe in actually creating closed-loop carbon cycles. Whatever products we produce out of it, whether they are short-lived or long-lived, they can be recycled at the end of their useful life, either mechanically, chemically, or if it's not suitable for that, you can incinerate it and capture the same carbon and reuse it again. Then if we look a few words about the Carbon2X program and what we've done so far, we started the strategic program back in 21 with the idea, thinking how can we increase the circularity of waste and the carbon found in our waste streams. The following year, we did one of Europe's first CCU pilots ever demonstrated on a waste-to-energy plant. At the same time, we launched our Carbon2X concept. The following year, we built 2 laboratory containers for testing and developing the technologies for converting the captured CO2 into plastics. And I'm extremely proud to say that the following year, actually just a few months back, we announced that we have been successful in producing the world's first biodegradable plastics derived fully from CO2 emissions. And we also launched our innovative plastic trademark product called Inga. And if we look at how have we been so successful in just a few years, I would say that one of the biggest mistakes many companies do, they overplan. They overplan instead of being bold enough to taking action and developing this and trying it out in practice. And for sure, developing new technologies takes time, but I would say we don't have the luxury of time, since we do know that the legislation is not supporting these initiatives today. But we need to move ahead, and we need to rely on that in due time these policies and incentives are there when the technologies are ready. But in essence, I would just summarize it as take action and believe in what you're doing even when faced with great uncertainty. Thank you.
All right, hello. My name's Sam Lowe. I'm coming from Unilever, but today I'm going to be talking about a project called Flutichem, which is a 17-party consortium project built across an entire supply chain to try and verify the building of surfactants, a workhorse material for the fast-moving consumer goods companies, and for paints as well, from CO2. But before I quickly talk about that, I'm going to frame it in terms of the problem that we face. So 80% of the emissions that Unilever as a company faces are tied to basically oil and gas extraction and the biodegradation of materials at their end of life. There are a couple of different ways that we can address this challenge, and I'll talk about those in a second. But first of all, let's look at what happens with these materials. So currently, there is a one-way street of carbon flow as we dig those materials out of the ground, that oil and gas. We process it into chemical intermediates, and then those are either burnt as fuels, and the vast majority of them are burnt as fuels, or we look at the chemical sector, and that we haven't really spoken today very much about the chemical sector. These are then go through multiple processes before they face end of life. And end of life can be, in our case, it's biodegradation, or it could be that it sits around as paints for up to 100 years. So in those cases, great, you've got a sequestration case. But in our case, where we are required by regulation for them to biodegrade, it's a bit more of a problem. So what are the solutions? Well, there's 3 basic areas of solution. The first one, biomass, but we face a problem to do with land usage. The second one, recycling, but we face a problem to do with the dispersed nature of that material and trying to gather it all together, and then the multiple chemical steps that have to occur in order to convert it. But still, those 2 are probably the most viable. Finally, we have carbon capture utilization. Now, we think biomass will probably be able to solve about 20% of our carbon needs when it comes to our raw materials. Plastics recycling, 30 to 40%, probably. But then we end up with this big gap that we have to face, and that's likely to either be CCU, and then maybe we can start thinking, from our perspective, about CCS. So what is this project? What is it assembled out of? It's an entire value chain. So at the very front end of it, we've got three point source emission sites. We've got UPM, Holman, these are biogenic point source emission sites. We've got Tata Steel, a steel mill down in Port Talbot in the southwest of Wales. We then have two parallel carbon capture technologies with CCU International and, sorry, one second. And Carbon Clean. We then have two parallel technology pathways which we've been investigating. The first one is a biotechnology route, and this is looking at the production of ethanol and long-chain fatty alcohols using biotechnology, so bugs, direct from CO2. And directly in competition with that, we have stacked up thermocatalytic routes using CO2 directly to ethanol, using novel catalysts, and CO2 directly to long-chain olefins and then fatty alcohols using a technology called Fischer-Tropsch, which has been around for quite a long time. Croda then brings all of that together, plugs it all together, creates our alcohol ethoxylate surfactant, which was selected because it's such a workhorse for our industry, but it's also because it represents two of the foundation building blocks that are needed for our entire chemical sector. And then finally, we have the end users. So Unilever, Procter, Reckitt, and Tata Steel. And bringing all of these teams together into one place was a challenge within its own right, and it took almost as long as the project itself has taken, which has been the last 2 years. There are then three other organisations that have been supporting. So we have the Confederation of Paper Industries, who are identifying new opportunities for CCU across their sector. We have the University of Surrey that have been conducting a life cycle assessment, techno-economic assessment, and social risk assessment. And then the Society of Chemical Industry have been assisting with our communications. So I'm going to quickly go through some of what we have learnt so far. Firstly, I know that we're here really to talk about carbon capture, but the root problem that we face is also energy, both in terms of the carbon capture, but also, as it turns out, to do with hydrogen. Hydrocarbons need hydrogen. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of it available on CO2, so you've got to get it from somewhere, and we need a lot of it. It's about, for every kilo of pure carbon, you need half a kilo of hydrogen. Logistics have been a major problem, partly because the TRL scales of a lot of these technologies are at different levels. So at one stage, we're dealing with tons of CO2, and another stage, we're dealing with milligrams of ethanol being produced from catalysts, which have been entirely newly created. Biology can't yet produce those C12, C14 fatty alcohols directly from CO2. This was a major finding for us early on in the project, but we've got loads of ideas about how we could go there. Something else that was a surprise to us, perhaps because we sit in Unilever, is that the UK doesn't have great access to scale-up facilities or the ability to work flexibly. We don't have things like the Fraunhofer or the Max Planck Institute that we can just plug into. Finally, just to talk in terms of some of the learnings from my predecessor, planning is great, but we have to get more engineers on site. And this has been a major problem all the way through this. We've got a deficit of engineers for us to work with. And regulation and fiscal policy has been a constant theme all the way through today. We don't have an equivalent for SAF either in terms of mandates or in terms of incentives for the chemical industry. And this is something that we're crying out for at the moment. What have we achieved so far? We've successfully scaled up a new carbon capture technology. So the solid phase system from Carbon Capture Utilization International, this was an idea at the beginning of the project. We've managed to take that to a 1 ton per day in a matter of a year and a half, and it's currently running today, which is fantastic. We've managed to develop two new catalysts, CO2 directly to ethanol in the case of BASF, and CO2 to long-chain olefins, C12, C14 olefins, and then to fatty alcohols were also developed by the University of Sheffield. We started to develop the LCA-TEA. What we've noticed from the LCA is that we're probably able to halve the greenhouse gas profile of our materials as a consequence of going down this pathway. And there have been 2 papers released over the past year by the University of Surrey looking into that. And final point, we are managing, slowly but surely, to communicate the problems that we're facing around defossilization and moving towards these diverse feedstocks. We need all of the feedstocks that are available. That means biomass, that means plastics, but it also means trying to access CO2 and turn it into useful materials. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Vail. I'm the CEO of Ion Clean Energy. We are a carbon capture company, so these guys need to utilize the CO2 for their processes. We're the ones that capture it from the flue gas. We are, let me see if I can get this started here, guys. There we go. We're based in Boulder, Colorado. The company was actually founded in 2008 by our founder and chairman, Dr. Brown. He came from the pharmaceutical world, and his concept is that there's got to be a better amine. There's got to be a better way to make an amine solvent in the carbon capture space. This was in 2008. Weren't a lot of people who were very interested in carbon capture, point source carbon capture at the time. So he took a big leap of faith and went and started the company. Actually moved from Houston to Boulder, where the original technology was formed, and started the company really focusing on how do we make a more stable amine, something that can handle a high oxygen, high nitrogen environment. That was in the early days. We are now into our third generation of solvent, which we call ICE 31. Very successful. Dr. Brown was very successful in working with the Department of Energy in the United States, and received over $85 million of non-dilutive funds for the development of the technology over 15 years. It was a very impressive achievement, and was able to build the company with those dollars and limited dollars from some angel rounds. And so I joined just about a year ago with the goal of raising a new round of capital. We're a Series A company, so in venture cap terms, we're beyond the angel stage, and we're not quite to roll out. We're in that first wave of technology funding, and I came in to finish that round and then to commercialize the technology. You know, it's an interesting where we are in the space. We've got something that has been well proven on a pilot scale. We've have over 14,000 hours of piloting on the technology, funded by the DOE and others. And we've done that piloting in some of the top pilot facilities in the world, Carbon Capture Center in the United States, and also here in Europe at Technology Center Mungred, TCM, up in Norway, which is arguably the largest and most well instrumented carbon capture test facility in the world. And we've had really impressive results on our technology, on our solvent, and we've been able to demonstrate that to the technical and academic community through all this piloting. And what we found is that we're very good at low concentration flue gases that have a lot of oxygen and a lot of nitrogen on them. So if you think about what that is, that's power generation, whether it's natural gas power generation or it's coal-based power generation. We are very well advantaged in that particular space. And it just so happens in the United States in particular, but I'm sure here in Europe and the rest of the world, the data center or AI explosion and the demand for increased electricity is overtaking the markets and bringing a lot of excitement. And we are a company that can provide that, what we call the blue electron or the decarbonized electron, by coupling with the power provider, be it a natural gas turbine or a coal plant here in Europe. And we can provide that very low carbon or zero carbon electron at the bus bar, which to date has not really been considered as a viable market opportunity. Most companies were looking for a green, either a wind or solar opportunity. But now with the huge expansion and the needs for 100% 24/7 power, natural gas and coal have re-entered the marketplace and has set us up very well for Ion's technology introduction. But we actually have been in the marketplace. We have 4 large projects that are in FEED today. One is in California, where we're working with Calpine, which is a large independent power producer in the United States, on a 550 megawatt power plant. That's 1.5 million tons of CO2 captured per year. We're also working with a large utility in Florida at a 1 gigawatt plant, which is 2.5 million tons of CO2 a year, plus a number of other large-scale projects that are capturing a great deal of CO2 from that flue gas. And those, as I mentioned, those projects are well into FEED, and we hope to see FID in 2026 for at least one of those projects. So let me talk a little bit about what our technology is. We are an amine technology, which is It's something that the basic amine technology has been around in the energy industry for 100 years and is used for many different applications of CO2 capture. The original technology was a MEA-based, generically available amine solution, and the challenge with that is it had a very high energy consumption for relatively low capture rates, and it also degraded rather quickly, particularly in an oxygen environment, such as the flue gas of a power plant. And so what we did is we came up with the better solvent, the more stable solvent, and it really allowed us to enter into this space. So in the U.S., we're focused on natural gas generation. Here in Europe, we're looking at opportunities in the coal generation, and particularly in the biomass generation of converting existing coal plants into biomass. We operate very well on that flue gas, but we're also very good at pulp and paper and waste to energy, which is our interesting applications here in Europe. So, but what we can do, not only do we have a very stable and flexible solvent, but we can do some very interesting things with it. And this is what we proved at TCM in Norway. One, we can do what we call deep decarbonization. We can actually go to 99.6% capture rate on the flue gas with minimal energy uplift. And what that means is that the flue gas leaving our absorber column has less CO2 in it than pre-industrial Earth. So we're actually a removal, not just avoidance. We're actually capturing more CO2 than what is in the air. And we can also use less energy while doing that. So typically with a traditional amine, you see a hockey stick spike as you go up from 90% to 95% to 99%. We don't see that. We just see an average modest energy increase that doesn't really affect the bottom line. And we have, with that comes this ability with the stable solvent to not create what we call regulated emissions or VOCs in that same process. So we can go to 99.6, we use less energy, our solvent doesn't break down, and we don't create the emissions that are typically associated with a large-scale amine carbon capture plant. And that allows us to operate in environments that are very emission sensitive, like California with Calpine, like the Houston Ship Channel, which we call the non-attainment zone, and like the demands that you would have here in Europe on the regulated emissions, VOCs and whatnot. So we can do that, and we can do that at very high rates. And because the same properties of our solvent actually allow us to have more, a faster process, higher kinetics, we call it. So we capture CO2 faster than a typical MEA. So our facilities, the actual plant, can be smaller, maybe 20% smaller than a typical amine plant. And that translates into lower cost on the CapEx side. And because of the energy efficiency, lower cost on the OpEx side. And so it's a really interesting, technology. It meets, we're not having to do what some of the other folks that we heard earlier this morning, first of its kind plants, proving that, this system works. Amine plants have been around for a while. All we really need to do is prove that our solvent is better at these key attributes, and we've been able to do that. And, fortunately, we've had some great partners to allow us to do that. I mentioned we did our capital raise. Chevron New Energies was our primary investor. Carbon Direct, also out of New York, which is a science-based carbon reduction investment firm. And we've got some great OEM partners. And this is what's really key. I think one of the speakers earlier in an earlier session said, hey, we've got feed fatigue. We've got too many feeds. And so we've really taken the approach of working with engineering partners that can actually deliver, can actually build these plants, like Kiewit is working with us at Calpine. Koch Engineered Services is one of our major suppliers and major supporters of all the internals to our system as well as vessels. And we also work with some of the other largest EPC contractors in the United States. In closing, we're now moving to expand beyond the U.S. borders. We've got a great track record there and looking for continued rapid growth in the power space. But here in Europe, I think we have a very, very unique solution. So we're looking for partners. We're looking for the engineering firms that can help us like they have in the United States, but also customers that are looking for a different solution and a more efficient solution for point source carbon capture. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tim, very much. And I would like to open the floor to questions. Anyone has, please, you'll get the microphone, just one.
Thank you, sorry, President. Actually, I have a technical question to the last presenter. You said it's a very low. My name is Natalia Kulushenko. I'm from the World Bank. You said we are looking for opportunities outside the US, which is encouraging because that's what we are trying to do in development countries. But you said that it's a low energy consumption per liter consumption. Can you give a percentage what is included, because that's where the cost is covered?
Right, and it depends on where, who you're quoting against, but is it a 90% capture rate, is it a 95% capture rate, or is it a 99% capture rate? If we look at, what we quote, at ION is we quote 95% capture, and we're in that kind of 2.4 gigajoules per ton. So we're very competitive, maybe 10 to 15% less at 95% from our major competitors in the space. But where we really start to make a difference is if you really want to sell a low carbon electron or a low carbon steam, you want to try to get to that 99%. And that's where we are, significantly less energy intensive at the high rates, more like 70 to 80% less energy intensive at 99% capture rates.
Yes, sir.
Tim, I want to ask you about the NOx and SOx, H2S matters that comes out of your line.
Well, for us, we operate on the back end of a power plant, and that power plant will have regulated emission controls. So they'll have NOx and SOx removal pre it coming to our facility. So we're on the back end of the stack, but once it hits our unit, there are some trace elements that are still coming through, but those will pass through our absorber and meet and match what the existing host site would produce. What is most challenging with typical MEAs or amine solutions is that you start to create volatiles or volatile organic compounds, VOCs, on top of those NOx and SOx that have already been removed. And because we don't break down, because our solvent deactivates over time instead of breaking down over time, we never create those VOCs. So it never creates in the first place, so we don't have to clean them up on the back end. So we have very, very low emissions, almost unmeasurable VOC emissions from our absorber.
Question there.
Hi, Ian Pope from IVTechX. In terms of the plastics that you're developing from CO2 utilization, there's probably going to be some sort of cost premium associated with using those CO2 plastics. So roughly how many times more expensive are they now, and how do you see this decreasing in the future?
Yeah, good question. And usually we are getting asked, I guess that is the most asked question when talking about CCU products in general. I would say it depends, of course, a little bit on what type of plastic we are producing. But it is fair to say that when you talk about CCU, you will need to plug in hydrogen, and then that is the most cost intensive part of the value chain of producing any plastic. It is a few times more expensive than the fossil one, but then I would maybe turn the question the other way around, that producing fossil plastics is simply too cheap, and we need to think about incentives so that these solutions and CCU plastics in general will get incentivized so that this will become more profitable. And definitely we are not there yet. But I do believe that there are mechanisms in place, and one of that is, of course, the European emission trading scheme that I think is a good starting point. And it is predicted that the allowance cost will go up in the future. So I think that there are mechanisms already in place, but these just need further kind of attention in order for the CCU plastics to be competitive at some point in the future.
Any other?
Along that question, plastics that you're developing.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Along that question on the plastics that you're developing, have you looked into the reverse way of doing it? Actually breaking down the plastic and using the hydrogen?
No, we've not looked into that, and maybe the reason for that is coming back to where we are in the value chain. So we are incinerating the mostly mixed municipal waste. We also have this mechanical recycling of post-consumer plastic packaging already as a solution in our portfolio. So I would say that the beauty of this one is that basically that type of plastic that is not suitable for mechanical recycling or chemical recycling can be incinerated along with all the other waste. And there's no kind of requirements for what kind of waste we are treating. So there's no pre-sorting, there's no cleanliness requirements. What we are left with that we are incinerating, we can capture the value of that and recycle it into plastics.
Any other questions in the audience? Well, then I will thanks very much our panelists. There has been like a great presentations. Yeah, all the best.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.